The Great Hall of the Galactic Concordance stretched for nearly a kilometer, and inside, it gathered the representatives of 847 spacefaring species from across 3 spiral arms of the Milky Way galaxy. For 12,000 years, this coalition had maintained peace and order among the stars. And in all that time, they had seen countless primitive species rise and fall on distant worlds, most of them never achieving the technology needed to join the greater galactic community. On this particular day in the year 2247 by Earth's calendar, the assembly had gathered to discuss a newly discovered species from a small yellow star in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. Ambassador Kethvorin of the Velmori hegemony stood at the center of the speaking platform, his crystalline body catching the light from 1,000 floating orbs and scattering it in rainbow patterns across the chamber walls. "Fellow representatives of the Concordance," he began, his voice resonating through the translation systems that allowed all species to understand one another. "I bring before you the assessment of the Sol system and its dominant species, who call themselves humans." A massive holographic display flickered to life above him, showing a blue and green world orbiting its modest star. "Our survey drones have completed their analysis, and I must say the findings are rather underwhelming," Kethvorin continued, and a ripple of amusement passed through the assembled delegates. He gestured with one crystalline limb, and the display changed to show data streams in classification, metrics that scrolled past in dozens of alien languages. "Earth receives a Class 7 designation under our standard protocols," he announced. And murmurs filled the hall because Class 7 was among the lowest rankings possible for any spacefaring world. "Let me explain why this assessment is not only accurate but generous," the Velmori ambassador said, his form pulsing with barely concealed contempt. "First, these humans possess absolutely no psionic capabilities whatsoever, which means they cannot communicate through thought. They cannot sense danger through mental awareness, and they cannot defend themselves against even the most basic telepathic intrusion." Several delegates from psionic species shook their heads or made gestures of pity. "Second, their physical forms are remarkably fragile, consisting of soft tissue wrapped around brittle calcium structures they call bones, and they require constant intake of water and organic matter simply to survive from one day to the next. Third, and perhaps most amusing," Kethvorin said with what passed for a smile among his kind, "their natural lifespan barely exceeds 100 of their planetary rotations, which means that by the time one of them masters any significant field of knowledge, they are already dying of old age." Laughter echoed through the chamber, a strange symphony of sounds from hundreds of different species. "But surely they have some technological achievements worth noting," called out a delegate from the Outer Rim Coalition, and Kethvorin's crystal form flickered with annoyance. "Their technology is centuries behind concordance standards at minimum," he replied, "and I should mention that they did not even achieve faster-than-light travel through their own efforts." He brought up another display showing the wreckage of a small spacecraft. 40 years ago, a Telluri scout ship crashed on their world. And these humans did what they apparently do best. They picked through the wreckage like scavengers and copied what they found without truly understanding it. The Telluri delegation shifted uncomfortably, but did not dispute the account. "In summary," Kethvorin declared, "we are dealing with short-lived, fragile, non-psionic scavengers from what our biologists classify as a death world. A planet so hostile that everything on it evolved to either kill or be killed." He paused for effect before delivering his conclusion. "They learned to bang rocks together and call it civilization. And now they wish to join us among the stars. But I say we grant them observer status and nothing more, allowing them to watch from the edges of true civilization, for they will never matter in any significant way." The vote was called, and the results came swiftly. 831 species, voted in favor of the Class 7 designation with observer status, while only 16 voted against, and those 16 were mostly young species who remembered their own humble beginnings. In the visitors' gallery above the main chamber, a small human delegation watched the proceedings in silence. Secretary General Yuki Tanaka stood at the front of the group, her face revealing nothing of her thoughts as she listened to the mockery and dismissal of her entire species. She was 63 years old, which meant she had perhaps 30 or 40 years left to live by concordance standards, barely enough time to matter. Her aide, a young man named David Chen, leaned close and whispered, "Should we protest, Madam Secretary? Because surely we cannot accept this insult to our people." Tanaka shook her head slowly. "We accept it," she said quietly, "because acceptance costs us nothing and buys us everything." "I do not understand," David replied. The Secretary General watched as the concordance delegates began filing out of the chamber, already forgetting about the primitive species they had just dismissed. "While they were busy mocking us," Tanaka explained, "our technicians were busy recording everything. And I mean everything. Their technology displays, their communication frequencies, their security protocols, their fleet deployments, and most importantly, their star charts showing every major civilization and trade route in this galaxy." David's eyes widened as he began to understand. "They think we are stupid because we are young," Tanaka continued. "But they have forgotten what it means to be young and hungry and desperate to survive." She turned to face her delegation, and in her eyes burned something that the concordance had failed to detect in their assessment. Not anger, not despair, but cold and patient determination. "We came here to learn," she said, "and they just gave us the greatest education in galactic history. So now we go home and we study everything we have gathered, and we wait." "Wait for what?" asked another delegate. Secretary General Tanaka looked back at the now empty chamber one last time. "Wait for the galaxy to give us a reason to show them exactly what humanity can do when we stop asking for permission and start taking what we need." The human delegation departed quietly, carrying with them data storage devices containing more information than any primitive species had ever acquired in a single visit to the concordance. No one stopped them. No one checked their belongings. No one thought to worry about what the irrelevant humans might do with everything they had seen and heard. And that was precisely the mistake that would change galactic history forever. 18 months after humanity received its Class 7 designation, something terrible emerged from the dark spaces between the stars. The Krethax Dominion had existed for almost as long as the Concordance itself. But while the Concordance had chosen diplomacy and trade, the Krethax had chosen a different path entirely. They were harvesters. Their massive ships traveled from world to world, collecting organic life and processing it into the biological material their silicon-based bodies required to reproduce and grow. For centuries, they had slowly pushed against the borders of Concordance space, testing defenses, probing for weakness, and the Concordance had responded with economic sanctions and diplomatic warnings, confident that their superior numbers would keep the harvesters at bay. But the Krethax were patient, and they were cunning, and they had been watching the recent events in the Galactic Assembly with great interest. On a morning that began like any other on Earth, the sky above Southeast Asia turned dark. Massive ships descended through the clouds, each one stretching for kilometers, their hulls covered with collection arrays and processing vats that glowed with sickly green light. The first city to fall was Jakarta, and its 20 million inhabitants had no warning and no chance to flee. Collection beams lanced down from the harvester ships, and wherever those beams touched, human beings simply vanished, pulled upward into the processing holds where they would be broken down into their component chemicals. Within 3 hours, the city was empty. Bangkok fell next, then Manila, then Mumbai, and the harvesters worked with terrible efficiency as they swept across the most densely populated regions of Earth. Secretary General Tanaka stood in the Emergency Command Center beneath the Swiss Alps, watching the reports flood in with growing horror. 40 million harvested in the first 6 hours, reported her military advisor. General Marcus Chun, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. And our weapons are doing almost nothing to those ships. Earth's defenders had tried everything. Nuclear missiles, orbital kinetic strikes, even ramming attacks with cargo vessels. But the Krethak ships absorbed the damage and kept harvesting. Send the distress signal to the Concordance, Tanaka ordered, and broadcast it on every frequency we recorded during our visit. The signal went out across the stars, a desperate plea for help from a species facing extinction. In the Great Hall of the Galactic Assembly, Ambassador Kethvorin received the transmission and immediately called an emergency session. The humans are under attack, he announced to the gathered delegates, and they are requesting military assistance from the Concordance. Murmurs of concern filled the chamber, but they were not the sounds of species preparing for war. This is unfortunate, said a delegate from the Telluri, but surely we must consider the risks of engaging the Krethaks directly, as they have never attacked a full member of the Concordance, and perhaps we should not provoke them. I agree, added another representative, and we should also remember that Earth is not a full member, but merely an observer world, which means we have no legal obligation to defend them. Kethvorin listened to the debate with satisfaction, because this was exactly the outcome he had expected. Perhaps we should form a committee to study the situation, he suggested, and in the meantime, we can issue a strong diplomatic statement condemning the Kreth actions. But millions of humans are dying right now, protested Delegate Morath of the Outer Rim Coalition, and if we do nothing, we become complicit in their destruction. The Krethaks chose Earth precisely because they knew we would not intervene, Kethvorin replied smoothly. And if we prove them wrong, we invite them to test our resolve against full member worlds instead. So really, we are protecting the Concordance by allowing this regrettable situation to proceed. The vote was called. Should the Concordance intervene militarily to save Earth? 792 species voted against intervention. By the time the session ended, another 50 million humans had been harvested. On Earth, Secretary General Tanaka received the news of the Concordance's decision in silence. General Chun slammed his fist against the console, his face twisted with rage, and demanded, "How can they abandon us like this when they have the power to stop this slaughter?" Tanaka closed her eyes for a long moment. "Because we are irrelevant to them," she said quietly, "and because they have grown so comfortable in their ancient civilization that they have forgotten what it means to fight for survival." She opened her eyes, and General Chun saw something in them that he had never seen before. Not despair, but a cold and terrible resolve. "Send one final message to the Concordance," she ordered, "and make sure every species in the galaxy hears it." The message was brief. "We understand." Tanaka's voice echoed across the stars. "And we will remember." Then Earth went dark. The planetary communication network shut down. The orbital satellites went silent, and the Sol system became a void of electromagnetic silence. The Krethaks continued their harvest for 3 more weeks, collecting nearly 200 million humans before their ships finally departed, their holds full of processed biological material. In the Galactic Assembly, Kethvorin announced that the situation had resolved itself and that the Sol system should be marked as Krethak's occupied territory. "A regrettable loss," he said, "but ultimately insignificant in the grand scale of galactic affairs, and now let us move on to more important matters." The Assembly agreed, and within days no one was talking about the fallen human world anymore. But deep beneath the mountains of Earth, in bunkers that had survived the harvest, Secretary General Tanaka gathered the survivors and spoke to them. "They called us irrelevant," she said, and they watched our people die because they believed we did not matter. Her voice grew stronger, carrying to every hidden shelter where humans still lived. They were wrong, she declared, and we are going to spend every moment of every day proving just how wrong they were. We will learn their technologies and improve upon them. We will build ships and weapons unlike anything the galaxy has seen. And when we emerge from this darkness, we will make them understand that humanity is not a species to be dismissed. We will make them remember every single person they allowed to die. And we will make them afraid. The survivors cheered, and in that moment, in the ashes of their near extinction, humanity began to forge itself into something new. Something the galaxy had never encountered before. Something that would make the Concordants regret their decision for 1,000 generations to come. The age of human submission had ended. The age of human vengeance had begun. 3 years passed in the Sol system, and during that time the Galactic Concordants sent 17 reconnaissance drones to check on the status of the fallen human world. None of them ever returned. Ambassador Kethvorin dismissed the losses as unimportant, suggesting that the Krethags had likely left automated defenses behind to protect their new territory, and the Assembly agreed that it was not worth investigating further. They had more important matters to discuss: trade agreements and border disputes, and the endless political maneuvering that occupied the attention of ancient civilizations. Earth was forgotten, but on that blue and green world, now hidden behind a wall of silence, something extraordinary was happening. Secretary General Tanaka had established her headquarters in a vast underground complex beneath the Himalayan mountains. And from there, she coordinated the greatest transformation any species had ever undergone. "Give me your report, Dr. Okonkwo," she said one morning to the woman who had become humanity's chief scientist. Dr. Amara Okonkwo was a Nigerian physicist who had survived the harvest by pure chance, having been deep inside a research facility when the Krethak ships arrived. And now she led a team of the brightest minds left on Earth. "We have made breakthrough after breakthrough," Okonkwo reported, her eyes bright with excitement despite the exhaustion that marked her face. "And I believe we finally understand why." She pulled up holographic displays showing alien technologies from 6 different species. "The Concordance races stopped innovating thousands of years ago," she explained, "because they reached a level of technology that worked well enough and they became comfortable. They never thought to combine Velmori crystalline computing with Telluri biointegration, or to merge Morth plasma containment with Xerathi shield harmonics, because those species do not cooperate at that level, and they certainly do not share their secrets. But we have all their data from the assembly visit," Tanaka said, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Exactly," Okonkwo confirmed. "And because we had no preconceptions about what was possible, we asked questions they stopped asking millennia ago, and we found connections they never imagined." She showed a schematic of a new type of power reactor to combine 3 different alien technologies with human engineering. This reactor produces 10 times the energy of anything the Concordance uses, in a package 1/5 the size, and we can build it with materials we can mine from our asteroid belt. Similar reports came in from every department. Engineer Raj Patel had designed a new class of warship that the team called the Fury class. Smaller and faster than Concordance vessels, but armed with weapons that combined the best aspects of 6 different alien technologies. "The Concordance builds their warships for intimidation," Patel explained to a gathering of military commanders, "with massive hulls and impressive displays of force. But they have not fought a real war in 8,000 years. Our ships are built to kill," he said simply, "and nothing else." General Marcus Chen had transformed from a conventional military commander into something far more dangerous. "The Krethaks operate through a hive mind," he told his officers, "which means they think as one and react as one. And for thousands of years, every species they have fought has tried to match that coordination through rigid command structures. We are going to do the opposite. He unveiled a new combat doctrine that gave individual ship captains unprecedented freedom to make their own decisions in battle. Humans evolved as pack hunters, Chai explained, and we work best in small groups that can adapt to changing situations without waiting for orders from above. We will swarm them, he continued, attacking from every direction at once, changing tactics constantly, never giving them a chance to predict our movements, and when the opportunity comes, we will show them something they have never seen before. We will sacrifice ourselves to destroy our enemies. Because humans have always understood that sometimes the pack survives only when individuals are willing to die. Deep in the mountains of Switzerland, another project was underway. Dr. Okonkwo had cracked the secret of Krethak's hive-mind communication, and she had developed a weapon that could disrupt it. When I activate this device, she demonstrated to Secretary General Tanaka, the Krethaks within its range will suddenly find themselves unable to hear the hive, alone in their minds for the first time in their existence. What happens to them then? Tanaka asked. Based on our studies of captured samples, Okonkwo replied. They become confused and terrified, and their coordination falls apart completely. So instead of fighting one enemy with 1 billion bodies, we fight 1 billion enemies with no idea what they are doing. Month by month, the transformation continued. Shipyards built in the asteroid belt produced warships at an astonishing rate, each one crewed by humans who had lost family and friends to the harvest and who burned with the desire for revenge. Training camps hidden across Earth turned ordinary survivors into elite soldiers, teaching them to fight in ways that no species in the galaxy had ever seen. And through it all, Secretary General Tanaka kept her people focused on a single goal. We are not doing this just for revenge, she told them, although revenge will be sweet. We are doing this because the galaxy has shown us that no one will protect us except ourselves. And if we want to survive as a species, we must become so dangerous that no one will ever dare to attack us again. We must become the thing that other species fear in the darkness between the stars. By the end of the 3rd year, humanity had built a fleet of 400 Fury-class warships, trained an army of 2 million soldiers, and developed weapons and tactics that would shock the galaxy. And when the Krethak's Dominion sent a second wave of harvester ships to collect more biological material from what they assumed was a broken and helpless world, they had no idea what was waiting for them. The reconnaissance drones that had disappeared over the past 3 years had not been destroyed by automated defenses. They had been captured, studied, and used to feed false information back to anyone who might be watching. Earth had been preparing. And now Earth was ready. The time for hiding was over. The time for war had come. The second Krethak's harvesting fleet arrived in the Sol system, expecting to find the same broken world they had left 3 years earlier. 17 massive bioharvester capital ships, each one stretching 3 kilometers from bow to stern, emerged from faster-than-light travel near the orbit of Jupiter and began their slow approach toward Earth. The hive mind that controlled them felt satisfaction at returning to such a rich feeding ground, and they sent scouts ahead to identify the densest population centers for collection. The scouts never reported back. For the first time in thousands of years, the Krethak's hive mind felt something it did not recognize: confusion. Then the darkness around them came alive with light and fire. 400 human warships dropped out of concealment simultaneously, their engines blazing as they accelerated toward the harvester fleet from every direction. Admiral Yuki Tanaka, the former Secretary General, who had taken a battlefield commission to lead humanity's first interstellar offensive, watched from the bridge of the flagship Remembrance as her forces engaged. All ships, she broadcast across the fleet. Remember why we fight? remember who we lost, and show these monsters what happens when they mistake mercy for weakness. The Battle of Luna had begun. The Krethaks responded as they always did, forming their ships into a defensive sphere and attempting to coordinate their fire through the hive mind. And for a moment, their superior size seemed to give them the advantage. But then Dr. Okonko's weapon activated. Across the Harvester fleet, Krethak's drones suddenly found themselves cut off from the hive mind, alone in their heads for the first time in their existence. Panic spread through their ranks as millions of silicon-based creatures who had never experienced individual thought were suddenly forced to think for themselves. Ships that had been moving in perfect coordination began to drift and collide. Weapons that had been firing in synchronized barrages fell silent, and the great Harvester fleet became a confused mass of metal and terror. General Chun's tactical doctrine proved devastatingly effective. Human ships did not form neat lines or exchange volleys at long range like concordance vessels. Instead, they swarmed in packs of 5 to 10, targeting weak points that their intelligence teams had identified during 3 years of studying captured Krethaks technology. Hit the collection arrays, came the orders across the fleet. Those are connected directly to their power distribution systems. And if you take them out, the whole ship loses main power. One after another, the giant harvesters went dark. But the Krethaks were not helpless, and even in their confusion they managed to destroy dozens of human ships, their massive weapons tearing through the smaller vessels like paper. And then humanity showed the galaxy something it had never seen before. Captain Maria Santos of the destroyer Vengeance took a direct hit that crippled her engines and killed half her crew. Any other species would have abandoned ship or signaled surrender. Captain Santos didn't either. Navigation, she ordered, her voice calm despite the blood running down her face. Plot a collision course with that harvester's main reactor. Captain, we will not survive, her helmsman replied. I know, Santos said, but neither will they, so do it. The Vengeance accelerated on its final course, and Captain Santos broadcast one last message to the fleet. Earth remembers, Earth endures, and Earth makes them pay. The explosion that followed took out the largest harvester in the Krethaks fleet. It was not an isolated incident. Across the battlefield, human ships that were too damaged to continue fighting made the same choice, ramming themselves into critical systems, detonating their reactors at point-blank range, and taking as many enemies with them as possible. The Krethaks hive mind, slowly regaining coherence as they adapted to the jamming, could not understand what they were seeing. No species in their long history of harvesting had ever been willing to die rather than submit. No prey had ever charged toward the predator instead of running away. By the 6th hour of the battle, 12 harvester ships had been destroyed or disabled, and the remaining 5 were attempting to flee. Admiral Tanaka's voice echoed across the fleet. Do not let a single one escape, because if even one returns to Krethak space, they will send more. And next time they will be ready for us. The pursuit was merciless. Human ships ran their engines past safety limits, pushing their vessels to speeds that risked tearing them apart, all to catch the fleeing harvesters. The last Krethak ship was destroyed over the Pacific Ocean, its burning wreckage falling into the same waters where millions of humans had been harvested 3 years earlier. Admiral Tanaka broadcast on all frequencies, ensuring that every species in the galaxy with the ability to monitor communications would hear her words. This is Admiral Yuki Tanaka of the United Earth Defense Coalition, broadcasting to the Galactic Concordance and all who chose to abandon us in our hour of need. The Krethaks came to harvest us, and we have destroyed them. Earth remembers what you allowed to happen to our people. Earth endures despite your abandonment. And Earth is coming for those who thought they could prey upon us without consequence. Within days, the human fleet had not only secured the Sol system, but had begun pushing into Krethak's territory. They did not negotiate, they did not accept surrender, and they did not take prisoners. Every harvesting world was sterilized, every breeding colony was destroyed, and every Krethak's drone that they found was eliminated without mercy. The Concordants watched in stunned disbelief as a species they had dismissed as irrelevant systematically exterminated a major galactic power. Ambassador Kethvorin called an emergency session of the Assembly. The humans must be stopped, he declared, his crystalline form flickering with fear rather than contempt for the first time, because they are not acting like a civilized species. They are acting like predators, and if we do not contain them now, who knows where they will. Stop. You had your chance to contain this situation 3 years ago, replied Delegate Marth coldly, and you chose to do nothing while they were being harvested. Now they are doing what you refused to do. They are solving the Krethak's problem permanently. And if they turn on us next, Kethvorin demanded. Marth looked at the Velmori ambassador with something like satisfaction. Then I suggest you start hoping that humans are more forgiving than you were. The Krethak's dominion, which had terrorized the galaxy for 12,000 years, fell in 18 months, and the galaxy began to understand that it had made a terrible mistake in calling Earth irrelevant. The Great Hall of the Galactic Concordance had never been so quiet. 847 species sat in their designated sections, and none of them dared to speak as the human delegation entered through the main doors. Admiral Yuki Tanaka walked at the head of the procession, her uniform bearing the symbols of battles won and enemies destroyed. And behind her came General Marcus Chun, Dr. Amara Okonkwo, and 100 other representatives of a species that had transformed itself from victims into conquerors. She took her place at the speaking platform, the same platform where Ambassador Kethvorin had mocked humanity 4 years earlier, and she looked out at the assembled delegates with eyes that held no warmth. 4 years ago, I stood in the visitors' gallery above this chamber, Tanaka began, her voice calm but carrying to every corner of the vast hall. And I listened as you declared my species irrelevant. I accepted your judgment because I thought that perhaps we could learn from you, that perhaps we could find our place among your ancient civilizations through patience and diplomacy. Her expression hardened. Then the Krethaks came, and I learned the truth about your concordance. I watched as you debated procedure while 200 million of my people were harvested. I listened as Ambassador Kethvorin argued that defending us would be inconvenient, and I saw 800 species vote to let us die rather than risk their comfortable existence. She paused, letting the silence grow heavy. The Krethak's dominion no longer exists, Tanaka continued, and they no longer exist because humanity did what you were too afraid to do. We fought them, we bled for victory, and we wiped them from the galaxy so that no other species would ever suffer what we suffered. Now I am here to discuss the future. Ambassador Kethvorin rose from his seat, his crystalline form dim with fear, but still trying to maintain some dignity. Admiral Tanaka, he said, surely you must understand that the Concordance acted according to established protocols. And while the outcome was regrettable, we cannot be blamed for following our own laws. I understand perfectly, Tanaka replied, and I am not here to punish you for your cowardice, because frankly, you are not worth the effort. The insult hung in the air, and Kethvorin flinched as if struck. I am here to offer you a choice, Tanaka continued, and I suggest you consider it carefully. She gestured, and holographic displays appeared throughout the chamber showing the human fleet. Not 400 ships anymore, but 4,000, with more being built every day. Humanity will join the Galactic Concordance, she announced. Not as observers, not as Class 7 primitives, but as full members with full voting rights and seats on every military and security council. Murmurs of protest rose from several delegations, but they fell silent when human soldiers stationed around the chamber shifted their weapons. In exchange for this recognition, Tanaka continued, humanity will extend its protection to any Concordance member that faces threats similar to what we endured. But, and her voice turned cold as ice, there will be one non-negotiable condition that every species must accept. She looked directly at Keth Voren as she spoke. Any species that targets civilian populations for harvesting, enslavement, or extermination will face humanity's full military response. And we will not stop until that threat is eliminated completely, just as we eliminated the Krethax. You cannot dictate terms to the Concordance, Keth Voren protested weakly. I am not dictating terms, Tanaka replied. I am offering you a partnership. And the alternative is that we continue to operate independently, building our strength, forming our own alliances, and eventually becoming powerful enough that the Concordance becomes irrelevant to us. She let that sink in before continuing. I am also offering you something you have not had in 8,000 years, a species willing to do the dirty work of keeping the galaxy safe. You have grown comfortable in your ancient civilizations, and you have forgotten what it means to fight for survival. But we have not forgotten, and we never will. Accept our terms, and you gain protectors who will stand between you and every predator species in the galaxy. Reject our terms, and you face the future alone, knowing that the next Krethax might target your worlds instead of ours. The vote was called. 844 species voted to accept humanity's terms. 3 voted against, the Velmori, the Telluri, and one other species whose name would be forgotten within a century. Ambassador Keth Voren was stripped of his position before the session ended, and within a year he had been exiled to a mining colony on the edge of known space. On his last day before departing, a journalist asked him what lesson the galaxy should take from humanity's rise. The former ambassador was silent for a long moment, his crystalline form dull and cracked with age and shame. Never call them irrelevant, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, and never, ever give them a reason to prove you wrong. In the decades that followed, the galaxy transformed under humanity's influence. Human admirals commanded mixed-species fleets that brought order to lawless regions of space. Human scientists shared their innovations freely, breaking the technological stagnation that had gripped the Concordance for millennia. Human diplomats mediated disputes that had festered for thousands of years, bringing peace to worlds that had known only war. And whenever a predator species threatened the innocent, human warships appeared to end the threat with ruthless efficiency. The historians of 100 worlds would eventually agree on one thing. The day the Concordance dismissed Earth as irrelevant was the day the old galactic order began to die. A new era had begun, an era shaped by a species that had refused to accept its own destruction, that had transformed tragedy into strength, and that had taught the galaxy a lesson it would never forget. Humanity had crawled out of the mud on an unremarkable rock orbiting an unremarkable star, had learned to walk upright, had reached for the heavens, and had been told they would never matter. They had responded by becoming the most important species in galactic history, not because they were the oldest or the wisest or the most technologically advanced, but because they were the ones who refused to give up, who turned every setback into fuel for their determination, and who proved that the measure of a species is not where they start, but how far they are willing to go. They had been called irrelevant. The war that followed proved them wrong, and the galaxy would never make that mistake again.